Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of history's most dramatic periods, a time when a conquering empire, a translated Bible, and a bloody rebellion completely reshaped a faith and really set the stage for a new world. For the Jewish people who had just returned from exile in Babylon, this wasn't some abstract philosophical question. It was the reality they were facing. A huge cultural tidal wave was about to crash over their world, forcing them to figure out what truly holds a community together. And this wave, this incredible force of change, it really all starts with one man, Alexander the Great. His conquest brought way more than just soldiers. They brought an entire worldview, a whole new way of life that was going to challenge, well, everything.
And that worldview has a name, Hellenism. But it's so much more than just speaking Greek. Really, think of it as a cultural tsunami. All of a sudden, you've got gymnasiums and theaters for Greek plays and these new philosophies that started to seep into every part of daily life.
And this is where you really see the clash, right? You've got two fundamentally different worlds colliding. On one side, you have a world built around the Torah, the law, the synagogue, and a sacred covenant with God. And on the other, a world of philosophy, of public sports in the gymnasium, and this new idea of being a citizen. It forced a really difficult choice. Do you stick with tradition, or do you assimilate into this powerful new culture? So, after Alexander dies, his massive empire just shatters, and Judea finds itself stuck in the worst possible spot, literally sandwiched between two of the rival Greek kingdoms. You have the Ptolemies in Egypt to the south, and the Seleucids in Syria to the north. This meant Judea was a constant battleground with its people caught in the middle, trying to survive under these shifting rulers.
But the challenge wasn't just military. Far away, in the bustling cosmopolitan city of Alexandria, a huge Jewish community was facing a totally different kind of crisis, one that was threatening their faith from the inside out.
So here's the problem. The kids, the next generation born and raised in this big Greek city, they didn't speak Hebrew anymore. The language of their friends, of business, of their future, it was all Greek. So how do you pass on your faith when your children can't even read the sacred texts? The answer they came up with was revolutionary, and honestly, pretty controversial.
They decided to do something huge, translate the Holy Scriptures into Greek. And the story goes that the Egyptian king Ptolemy II, who wanted a copy of every important book in the world for his library, commissioned 72 Jewish scholars for this massive project. And this is where the legend that grew around the translation becomes so powerful. The story that all 72 scholars, working totally alone, somehow produced the exact same Greek text. I mean, the message was clear. This wasn't just a human translation, it was a miracle. It gave this new version, called the Septuagint, a kind of divine authority. It was like saying, see, even in a new language, God's word is still perfect.
And you really can't overstate how huge this was. The Septuagint basically built a bridge that allowed Jewish law and stories to flow into the much wider Greek-speaking world. And it would become the very text used by the early Christians to spread their message, a total game changer. Okay, so while scholars in Alexandria are choosing translation, a very different answer to the Greek threat was brewing back in Judea, an answer forged not with ink and paper, but with swords and daggers. The Seleucid king, Antiochus IV, decided he was going to wipe out Judaism for good. He wasn't just encouraging assimilation anymore, he was demanding it. He put his own guys in as high priests, people who were loyal to him, not the Torah. And then he committed these ultimate acts of desecration, putting a statue of Zeus in the temple, sacrificing a pig on the holy altar, and banning core Jewish practices. This was basically a declaration of war on their entire identity. The breaking point finally came in a small rural town. When an official tried to force a pagan sacrifice, an old priest named Mattathias just snapped. He refused, killed the official, and fled to the hills with his 5 sons. And just like that, they launched what looked like a completely hopeless guerrilla war. His son Judah was such a fierce fighter he earned the nickname Maccabee, the Hammer.
And here's the crazy part. Against all odds, this rebellion of farmers and priests, it actually worked. They used their knowledge of the land, fighting hit-and-run battles where the big Greek army was weakest. And in 1640 BCE, they did the unthinkable. They retook Jerusalem. They marched into the defiled temple, tore down the pagan junk, and rededicated it to God. And that victory, of course, is what's still celebrated today as Hanukkah.
So, the Maccabees win, and they establish the Hasmonean dynasty, the first independent Jewish kingdom in over 400 years.
But, winning the war is one thing. Winning the peace, well, that turned out to be a whole other ball game.
And here is the great irony of the whole story. The Hasmonean rulers, the descendants of the rebels, they became priest kings. But to hold on to power, they had to start playing international politics. They made treaties, they adopted Greek customs, and pretty soon they got sucked into the exact same power struggles and corruption they had fought to overthrow. It created these deep, bitter divisions within their new kingdom.
And all this turmoil gave rise to two major groups that would really define this whole era. First, you had the Sadducees. They were the wealthy, priestly elite. They ran the temple and, frankly, were willing to compromise with Greek culture to stay in power. Then you had the Pharisees. They were scholars, more connected to the common people, and they were all about applying the Torah to everyday life. They resisted assimilation, and their power base was in the local synagogues. This wasn't just politics, it was a battle for the very soul of the nation.
This internal conflict, this battle for the nation's soul, it eventually just tore the Hasmonean kingdom apart. You had two brothers locked in a brutal civil war for the throne, and when you have a power vacuum like that, someone is always waiting in the wings to step in.
And that new power symbol was the eagle. We're talking about Rome, and their arrival meant the end of Jewish independence for almost 2,000 years.
And get this, the two warring brothers actually appealed to Rome to come and settle their dispute. Big mistake. The Roman general Pompey was more than happy to help. He marched his army right into Jerusalem, ended the civil war by conquering the city, and just like that, the kingdom became a client state of Rome.
Then, just to stamp Roman authority on the whole situation, Pompey did something truly unimaginable. He walked straight into the temple's most sacred room, the Holy of Holies, a place only the high priest could enter, and only once a year. Now, he found it empty, but the act itself, it was a devastating symbol that even if the building stood, its soul had been violated.
And so that leaves us with this final, massive question. Their independence is gone. Their temple has been desecrated by a foreigner. If your kings, your priests, and your armies can't protect your faith, what can? This question would hang over everything for the next 100 years, as people's hopes turned away from earthly power and toward prophecy, and the search for a Messiah who could truly set them free.